Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens with your hosts, Jake and Scott. And we're going to be discussing probably a question we've all been asked. What's your favorite bottle? What's your desert island bottle? How would you build your bar? So on and so forth. But we're going to take a very unique approach. So follow along with Scott and I as we unpack what our everyday bottle would be, our cocktail bottle, high proof, top shelf, and wild card bottle. So sit back and buckle into the latest episode of the Bourbon Lens. Scott, it's about time for you to make the trek to Florida with a hurricane coming. How you feeling?
Driving up against a hurricane. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think.
All right. Good thing you got all that young testosterone in your car. You'll get a lot of energy out of them.
Yeah. Hurricane Helene, I think is what the name of it is. It's
Helen fancy.
Yeah. This will be airing obviously after my vacation, but hopefully the hurricane dissipates pretty quickly. We don't have any issues, not only for our vacation, but just for everybody in Florida. So
yeah, no, I second that. I hope that everyone is safe. I hope that the travels are safe, and I hope you all have a great vacation. We're recording a bunch of podcasts in the next 48 hours to ensure that we don't miss a day. We did that one time. And we aim to never miss another Monday. So with that being said, we're going to keep this one short and sweet. But it is something that I think we've all had this conversation. We've all talked about it. And you've been asked it a variety of different ways. And I was just sharing with you in the pre-episode, I probably got stopped 3 or 4 times at Kentucky Bourbon Festival. Not many. I don't think we're like super face forward as a podcast. You know, people might have seen the logo and that's what they're like.
Famous.
Yeah. Not like, I felt bad for my man Bruzel. That dude got stopped like every 6 seconds. Greg's the most anonymous person that runs Bourbon Finds. If you don't know who he is, you'll never know. You see us from time to time. So I got stopped and they'd be like, oh, like, what's your favorite everyday drinker? Or like, how would you start this? And so this kind of got my mind thinking. I'm like, how would you build your 5-bottle bar? And so we put some criteria around it. Your everyday shelf bourbon, right, that you can just pull off and enjoy. A cocktail bourbon or whiskey, American whiskey, right? Any American whiskey is how we're opening this category. So cocktail, high proof, where would you go there? Your top shelf, and wild card. And I will tell you all, just to prepare, as a disclaimer, you may have heard that Scott loves Heaven Hill. You may see that show up on this list. So as a disclaimer,
no way.
You're probably right.
No way. It's not going to be on this list at all.
Yeah. So Scott, let me ask a question before we dive into the actual list that we've prepared and why we've done that. Over the past 6 years, rough estimate, how many different whiskeys do you think we've tried?
My goodness. An easy like 500.
Yeah. I was thinking about that the other day and I'm like, okay, so I know my bar has grown from 0 to 1,000. Like it's not 1,000 literally. But it's 300 plus. And so I've tried the majority of those. I would say there are samples that either you or I have gotten, that probably are 200 plus. And then you go to an event like Kentucky Bourbon Festival or wherever, and you try a plethora of whiskeys, or you go to a distillery and try a plethora of whiskeys. So I was thinking 600-700, easy. So this makes this job very tough, especially as we've explored different categories. It's no longer just Kentucky bourbon or just bourbon in general. It's rye whiskey. It's American single malt. It's a blend of straight whiskeys. It's finished bourbons, finished ryes. Like the American whiskey portfolio is huge. And this is not to say to all of our Scotch fans, and we like Scotch as well. We've come to enjoy it over time. We're focusing on America today because if we added in Scotch, it'd be very difficult to figure this out. So we're going to start with the easy one. This is a softball to you. Your everyday bottle that you would make sure you could stock your bar with.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that's the question I always get. It's like, what bourbon do you drink when you're not doing podcast things? And we all know what it is, but it's got to be JTS Brown. Like,
got to be.
It's the palate reset. It's the best, like, to start a night. Warm your palate up, or if you just need to reset to what Kentucky bourbon should taste like, that's what I go with. But obviously, that's no surprise to anyone. It's like going back to the, your intro, it's like whenever you brought this up, I was kind of like, is this going to be like supermarket sweep? Like you're in the liquor store, you've got a basket, you've got like 1 or 2 minutes, and you've got to run down the aisle and you got to put 5 bottles in your cart. Like, what would you do? That's what I imagined. Like whenever you brought this up, I was like, okay, we'll play that. So we'll do like they did in the 90s with the cereal aisle. You got to creep down low to get the bag cereal. We'll just do that for the JTS Brown. For sure. And shout out to Southern, I think it's Southern Spirits on Instagram. They do the 5-second game. That would be incredibly hard, but I definitely hear you. I want to call Liquor Barn now, and I want supermarket sweep for bourbon people. That would be amazing. Or whiskey people. That would be amazing. And they sell all types of other stuff. Got to call them. Got to call Brad now. We got an idea. Well, and that's the important part of like bottle and package design too. It's like, what's going to catch your eye? Like we do it all the time. We walk up to our bar. There's 50 bottles sitting on the shelf, like facing whatever. What do you grab? Like, you're just kind of walking by. You're like, oh, let me grab that because I haven't had it in a while, or it's flashy, or it's got a nice top, or I just want to pick it up. So, yeah, JTS Brown is not any of those things, but it's not flashy. It's got a screw top, but it's not flashy. Yeah, it's got an old school label. Makes people curious when it sits on the bar. They're like, what is that bottle? Is it old or is it new? Don't disagree. So qualifying this, right? Everyday shelf bourbon, like I think is something that you could get anywhere. And you may not anywhere in Kentucky. That's how I'm going to preface this because that's how we shop, right? We're not shopping in other states. And so a couple things crossed my mind. For an everyday pour, I want something between 90 and 100 proof. I want something at least 4 years old. And so in my head, I'm like, I got to go bonded in that realm. And so there was a couple that came to my mind. I think Starlight has good bonded product if you wanted to go outside of Kentucky to get something. I think you could go a little bit lower proof, maybe in the 80s. You could go, Starlight 4 grain or Basil Hayden or something like that for an everyday. But like you, I went with the Heaven Hill product as well. I went with Evan Williams White Label Bottled and Bond. One, I think it's a great value. You can get it at Costco, $23, 1.75. It's 4 or 5 year old bourbon probably in there. And it's just a great versatile pour over a cube in a highball, whatever you want to do with it. I think it's great. So we basically picked the same bourbon for every day. Yeah. Let's be honest. Yeah. But different reasons why. But it is something that when I'm cooking, quite honestly, it's the one that sits above the shelf, and I grab it and I pour it. It's just there. Now moving into the next part, I think, which is maybe a little more complicated for you and I, because we're not the craft cocktail people. We leave that to the fancy people, that do cocktails, like Cocktails with Friends podcast. Shout out to Bob. Make sure you're following them and subscribed there, or following him on Instagram. He's got an interesting podcast as we speak today, dropping this week, where he goes and plays golf with the golf pro at the club where his second restaurant is, Birdie's. Excited to hear that one. So what type of spirit do you lean for in a cocktail? Do you go bourbon? Do you go rye? Do you go something else? Yeah, I guess this really just depends on the mood, but I think that ryes typically stand up more in cocktails. Yep. We always say like, oh, you need a little bit more proof because it stands up better. I think that rye's characteristics of like that spiciness or that, that kind of that drying effect, or sometimes like the fruitiness, like the orange notes, the orange peel, orange oils, things like that kind of stand up in a cocktail. Especially for a whiskey drinking cocktail, there's not a whole lot of options. Now, there are going to be people that disagree. There's millions of cocktails with whiskey, but in my mind, there's only like a handful. So I would go with like a rye. Yeah. Okay. So rye whiskey, I lean that way as well. There's a couple honorable mentions in my mind. I like the peppery notes of like a Rittenhouse.
right? I think that's a really nice rye. You could probably talk to a good chunk of bartenders here in Kentucky. They would go that way. Not going to steal any of your thunder. But I picked one that was released last year to kind of round out the bonded series for Jack Daniels. I took Jack Daniels Bonded Rye. One, again, another incredible value at around $20 for the 750. I think it's like 25 for the liter. So something I think you can get an incredible value out of, something I think that is versatile all the way from a sidecar to an old fashioned to a Manhattan, and other things. But I think it would make a well-rounded cocktail, and it comes in at 100 proof. Again, can stand up to all the dilution and shaking and stirring you may do to a cocktail.
Yeah, no, I think the proof point's important, and that's why I chose what I chose, which Old Forester rye.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of like came out with a big splash, and it was like everybody was talking about it. Like I got like this great bubblegum note like that I really enjoyed. It's more of a corn-based rye. It's not 95.5 or 100% rye.
Yep.
So you get the sweetness of like a bourbon, but also it's just a little bit more versatile, right? We had the everyday pour bourbon, of course. If I've got a cocktail cocktail whiskey on my bar, I can also pour that neat too, but I think it's just going to stand up, and it's more versatile than a bourbon, I think.
Well, and I think it makes like a great freezer door cocktail. Again, you batch it up.
I need to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why I don't do it more. It's like, I love an old fashioned. It's like, why don't I just have it ready?
Yeah. I've saved like the recipes and like the reels. I've like clicked save on the app, and I'm like, I just need to do it. But it's like, shout out
to George Laboda, probably the most, controversial freezer door cocktail maker, but love Atlas and Mason also at Sip Survey. Judging for that. Nothing like blind whiskey tastings, but George's videos are good when it comes to freezer door cocktails. If you need a recommendation there. I just wish I could do cocktails more often. Like, I bought all like the stuff to do it. I just like neat pours are just so much easier.
I think that's why the freezer door thing is perfect. It's like, find a good ice maker or ice cube, whatever, or a supplier. Keep it in the fridge. Keep a couple garnishes. We all have fruits and stuff around. There's also some garnish companies that
dehydrate.
Yeah. So you don't need to keep a bunch of fresh fruit around, which I'm not a big fruit guy, but my kids always have fruit around, so can make it work.
Good choice. Now we're going to go to something that me and you don't do a ton. High proof bourbons. Now, or high proof whiskeys just in general. You could go many different ways. I think we both landed on a bourbon here. But this is something that the enthusiast community has really taken behind. It was kind of, I won't say revolutionized, but it hit its peak with Coy Hill, the original launch, at overclocked whiskey, right? 140. And we've seen other releases. Garrison Brothers has done that with Cowboy Bourbon and some others over time. So, you don't always do high proof, but when you do, you typically pick a good high proof bourbon. But couldn't we see a return to Heaven Hill here?
Yeah, I actually had two in mind. The Bullet barrel strength is always consistently good. But they're not super, super high proof. I think they're like 114, maybe.
Yeah. Middle of the road.
But for pure, like, regular release, like, I think that consistently, I was also looking at Booker's, but then I was like, consistency is a little bit more staggered. Elijah Craig barrel proof, I think it's hard to go wrong. It's like the response to what Booker's has grown to be. So I think, Elijah Craig, I kind of lean that way. But again, you can get 135 proof, 120 proof, it kind of varies, but the consistency is usually there.
Yeah, no, I can see that. It's a fun thing to do if you can collect all three in a year and then blind them and then figure out what your favorite one is. B's typically are my favorite and Elijah Craig's because they normally are the lower proofs of the group.
Yeah,
this year,
ride the wave.
Yeah, this year not so much. I think it came in at like 130. It was like, hey, it's May. Let's blow your face off a little bit.
Yeah. Hot.
So I went to the Sazerac family here for mine, and shout out to Dan Heavy Bourbon. If you don't know, he loves E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof. So my answer is E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof, not because Dan likes it, because I think it's just a phenomenal bourbon that's released every year. It's got good flavor, good characteristics. It's 120 plus proof. And I think it's everything that Buffalo Trace is at a high level.
Better
my
than
honorable
Stag?
mention.
Ooh.
See, I feel like Stag is variable. The batches are so like weeble wobbly on those. But my honorable mention to that is 1792 Foolproof, because it is a consistent 125 over and over and over again batch to a consistent blend.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And you can find single barrels that give you wonkiness of the 1792 portfolio, which we've done one and sold out in 3 days. Like it was awesome. So I think Sazerac does barrel proof bourbon pretty well, or foolproof bourbon pretty well. So I leaned E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof because it's one of my favorite. I have a backup bottle. Not many people have a backup E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof bottle, but I do. So I'm slowly working through the two that I have.
What did you think about the Barrel Proof Rye?
So I think the Barrel Proof Rye is very unique. I think it is something that needed to be done because the straight rye whiskey is very unique from E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof. It was kind of like it was here and then it was gone the next day. Like that's how I feel like the community as a whole approached that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a good thing. I'm just saying that it was like, we got the release went out, and then I haven't heard much about it since.
Yeah. A couple hundred people might've got the bottle. They probably are sitting on it. Nobody's really drinking it. I mean, I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it, which I didn't always expect, you know?
Well, Scott, ask and you will allow me to pour E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof Rye as we speak. That's what we do here on the podcast. It's sample palooza up here on the desk.
Yeah.
And I'll pour a little bit to that, and we'll keep on rolling. Now, this is something we don't do very often. I did at the beginning of the podcast. I spent a shit ton of money on bourbon, and I'm glad my wife didn't really pay attention. I made up for that when the fact that she, now buys treadmills and stuff randomly, and then I have to carry them downstairs.
Is this a sore subject?
We got a treadmill today. I did not know we were getting a treadmill. It is heavy, and it's got to come downstairs somehow.
Is this like a Peloton treadmill?
Oh, thank God not. But if it was, they would have assembled it in my house. That is the only saving grace. But neither here nor there. My wife got a treadmill. I used to come home with 750s of really expensive whiskey. I'm glad I don't do that anymore. You've never really done that. I've seen you spend $135 of Bourbon Lens money, but that's about it on a bottle.
Yeah.
So as you kind of think through this, top shelf is something that I find interesting from your opinion. Like, we've gotten to try many top shelf whiskeys and bourbons over time. What would be the one that you're like, hey, I'm going to sit this here. This is going to be a special occasion pour. And it is what?
Just because I've recently had it and it was incredible, but the Heritage Collection from Heaven Hill, 18-year-old Kentucky Straight Bourbon. Or, which I've not had, the 20-year-old corn whiskey, just because I think it's super cool that they did that. But
yeah,
again, I've not had it, so I can't really say, but I would spend my money on one of those two bottles.
I think those are both great answers. I love that Heaven Hill's taking back their name. It used to be like Heaven Hill, oh, that's Rock Gut Bourbon or Rock Gut, vodka. They've taken it back and they said, this is a premium name. And I love that they're doing really cool things with that. This has been really tough for me because I feel like I've gotten the opportunity to try a lot of top shelf whiskeys, bourbons, ryes, straight rye whiskeys. So I'll talk through this a little bit. I looked over here to my right and I was like, I got a really cool shelf in my room, in my office here. My first thought was Midwinter's Night Dram. I love High West, and I think Midwinter's Night Dram is great. It's got a special place in my heart. It like made me fall in love with the brand, and I have 7 or 8 of the chapters. But then I looked right above it, and I was like, oh, there's Michter's 10. And I'm like, that is a special bottle because they don't always put 10-year bourbon in there. Sometimes they put 15, sometimes they put 12, sometimes they put 17 because it's 10 to 20, right? Like that's how they go. And we've tried 20-year Michter's with Dan and Andrea. So I thought about switching this. I thought about going to Wild Turkey 17 bottled in bond, which is a special place in my heart. But I'm going back to Michter's. I know it's a single barrel. I know it's lower proof, but consistently M10s are just really damn good bottles of bourbon. So I'm going Michter's. Shout out to Dan and Andrea for coming on the podcast multiple times. Shout out to Marcus, our boy. That's where I'm leaning. And it's also a really, really cool bottle. The Diva bottle's cool, something to look at. But honorable mention to Midwinter's Night Dram and Wild Turkey Bottle and Bond 17 Master's Keep. So close to being either of those, but the Diva bottle is going to win out.
I thought just because of recency bias, you would have went with Russell's 15.
Yeah, but like if I blind that against 13, I don't know how much better it is than 13. And 13's blue and white. You would think I'd go with a blue and white bottle since I'm a Kentucky guy.
A little bias, extra bias.
Extra bias. Russell's 13 is phenomenal.
I think it's interesting that both of us like have picked like not purely outrageous, unattainable.
Yeah.
For our top shelf. Like, I think that's kind of cool too. It's like we could have both went with Michter Celebration, like Sour Mash 25 year. Like, what? But
yeah,
again, it's just like, what's a bottle that you want to put on your bar to pour top shelf when a special guest comes over, a family member comes over, you have your baby and you want, you want to share a pour with your dad, your brother, whatever. That's what I was thinking when I'm thinking about this. Like, yes, top shelf. We could have all went with some insane.
The last drop,
Pappy
we did for our 200th episode.
Yeah, Pappy 23. Like, of course, yeah.
Now, I will tell you, I mean, it doesn't get cooler than drinking like Pappy 20 with Julian Van Winkle on the 100th birthday of Pappy. Like, that was a freaking cool experience. But like, I also have the experience of like, hey, like I saved the old Rip Van Winkle for the birth of my son. And like, I drank that with people as they came over. Like, I think top shelf can mean a lot of different things to the individual. So as this podcast comes out, like I'm interested to see how people view the word top shelf, because another special bottle to me is Penelope Rosé, because my daughter's name's Penelope Rose.
Yeah.
Right. That's top shelf to me. One, because it's part of their kind of like Cooper series, which is cool that it's named after, Danny's kid, as Michael has the brand. His daughter's name's Penelope also. But like, I think it's just really cool. What does it mean to you? Top shelf could mean a lot of things, but Michter's 10, I think, is the essence of top shelf. It was the first release that they did. We saw people wait 2 hours in line for this bottle, and hundreds of people got it.
Yeah.
Not just one or two, just like the 18. Hundreds of people got the 18 at Heaven Hill at KBF.
Yeah.
So
and
definitely very cool.
Yeah. Hopefully it's like you open it, right?
Yeah. I mean, so I saw some people doing what we did maybe with the Booker's Reserves at KBF with Heaven Hill 18.
It's an experience. I mean, on my bar at home, my top shelf is our single barrel picks.
They mean something.
Yeah. I mean, I've got backups, but it's like, those are the bourbons that like when somebody's like, what is the Bourbon Lens? Or what do you want, what do you do on the Bourbon Lens? What is this podcast you got? That's what I'm like, oh, well, it gives me opportunities to do things like this.
Yeah.
I think that's cool.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. So now we're going to move into the fun one. Wild card. You can pick anything in American whiskey. Anything. Some may have called us the single malt lens for a time. Some may have called us the rye whiskey lens for the time, because we've kind of done a little bit of everything. So the floor is the floor is yours, Mr. Dilly. What is your wild card whiskey?
Yeah, I mean, looking back at my list, my other 4 out of the 5, trying to round out the bar, trying to make sure that I hit a little bit of everything. Maybe not pick another Heaven Hill product. I was.
If he did, it was mellow corn. By the way, everybody.
By the way, yeah, that's it. And that's the episode. And that's a wrap.
And done.
Yeah,
daiquiris, everybody.
Yeah. So I when you said wild card, I was like, American whiskey. I think I've got to go with like an American single malt. So I was like going down the list, like, who are some of my favorites? Okay, we got Westward. Westland's really good. Virginia Distilling. And I was like, almost had to be reminded.
Almost. He did have to be reminded, everybody.
Well,
for the record, I did remind him of this.
Yeah, because I was going between 2. But I think what's going on in Iowa is really freaking cool. Cedar Ridge, Murphy Quint, his quintessential series of American single malts, which are the special releases that he does, limited releases. I was thinking about the cigar malt because it's really good, but Portside I think is still just edging it out a little bit.
It's really good, guys. Like, if you can find a bottle anywhere, it's really good. Like, one of the better American single malts in the market.
It's like hard to describe too, because it's like unlike most single malts. Like it's just so rich, full of flavor, body. Like it's not light, it's not airy, it's deep, dark, rich. It's almost like a bourbon drinker's American single malt.
Yeah.
It's got like a raisiny, chocolatey, almost like coffee note to it. I think that's just the port influence.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I think you can't go wrong with that. I also thought you may have gone with the distiller's cut from Whiskey Delbach, because we both really liked that on the episode featuring them. So I thought that would have been another good wild card. They're about to release. They just released something new. Whiskey Delbach did.
Is it the Normandy?
The Normandy.
Yeah, they're seasonal release.
Yeah. So I also went American single malt. We've talked about this brand. If you have paid attention to the Bourbon Lens, our last episode featured this brand. It's from Colorado. We talked about their big, bold, cask strength bourbon. But they want to be known as an American single malt shop, and they should be, because they do some really cool things. It's got a fancy ass still. They got a dude from Scotland running the place. They got Ryan Nagley, who's got the best mustache in the business. And the 10 Essentials has been one of my favorite pours of 2024. Ryan came on our Patreon, talked all about Boulder Spirits, and we did sample packs, and it was great. I kept the 10 Essentials for myself. Scott has a bottle as well. Sorry, Patreon members, but the 10 Essentials compares to one of my favorite sips I've ever had. And that was with Brandon from the Daily Dram, Bardstown Bourbon Company, whatever you want to associate him with. He poured me a Dalmore 30 year, and it reminds me a lot of that Dalmore 30 year. It doesn't have the depth and complexity as much, but it gets me in that vein. And so because I can swim down that memory lane with my sensory taste profile palette, it excites me. So my wild card is also an American single malt, just from a different state in Colorado. If you're not paying attention to American single malt, I would say, take a gander at what's happening in that movement. It's not the volume in American spirits as bourbon or rye whiskey, but it is full of flavor, a ton of fun to enjoy, and can be something that will reset your palate and help you have different flavor senses overall.
Yeah, it's just fun to branch out and experiment.
Yeah.
As as I've heard from like I follow a lot of different like hobbies on YouTube and stuff. And it seems like a lot of people like 3 and 4 and 5 years in now that like we're post COVID, where everybody seemed to pick up a hobby. It seems like everybody got kind of tired of some of the things that were going on in their hobbies and they wanted to branch out a little bit. So I think it's a good way to branch out and try something a little bit different, but not stray too far. Like we're still going to do bourbon. We're still going to talk about Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey.
1,000%.
But it's
if
like,
we don't, come get us.
Yeah, but it's like dabble in American single malt. It's just fun.
Yeah. Okay, Scott. So for the listeners, what are your 5? So your everyday was?
JTS Brown, bottled and bond.
Your cocktail was what?
We had Old Faux Rye.
Your high proof was?
Elijah Craig, barrel proof.
Top shelf?
Heaven Hill 18, Heritage Collection.
And wild card for the last time for everybody?
We're going with Cedar Ridge Quintessential Portside.
Awesome. My everyday was Evan Williams White Label Bottled and Bond. Cocktail was Jack Daniel's Bonded. High proof was E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof. Top shelf was Michter's 10-year-old. Bourbon. The rye is also phenomenal, but bourbon. And my wild card was Boulder Spirits 10 Essentials. So do us a favor. We're gonna put this out the week of the podcast. All of our 5 in there together. You'll see 2 lists. You'll see Scott and Jake's sequence, remix, whatever the hell it is on Instagram. We want to know what yours are. So if you've followed along with us for the last 35 minutes, we've kept this episode short and sweet. We want you to partake in this. We'll be reaching out to folks. We want this to be a little bit of a movement. So 5 bottle bar, we're going to create a hashtag, and we'll make this a little bit of a movement. So make sure you let us know what your 5 bottle bar would be in the everyday, cocktail, high proof, top shelf, and wild card. Scott, I think we did a good job. I think people would appreciate either of our bars at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm picturing it now. I'm like gonna go rearrange the bar. That's the 5 bottles.
And then I'll get anybody else want to buy some half open bottles? I got plenty. Since my 5 bottle bar is going to be a lot smaller.
We are condensing.
We're shrinking the overall landscape of the bar. Our wives just got happier.
It's either that or Bourbon Lens storage unit weekly parties. I don't know. Could we do that?
Something like that.
Tasting club at the storage unit.
Yeah, like tasting club or bottle share. No, not bottle share. Bourbon Lens bottle share.
Bring bottles.
You don't bring bottles. You just come to us. Well, thanks everybody for listening to Scott and I create this 5 bottle bar. Each of ours are a little bit different, and we welcome to hear what you all may be thinking. Are you from Texas and you really are a stand for Texas whiskey and still Austin and Milam and Green? Are you from the East Coast and really want to have some rye whiskey or some Empire rye, or I was going to say Mahanganila, but that's wrong. Pennsylvania rye whiskey. Or are you from the Pacific Northwest and really want to be a stand for Westward and Westland? Let us know. Tell us all about it, because there's a lot of great American whiskey and you can build your 5 bottle bar in a variety of different ways. So thanks for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. And until next time, cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Make sure you're connected with Scott and I via social media on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We'd love to connect. And if you're more the professional type, follow us over on LinkedIn. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Pour. For exclusive content and more, check out Patreon. Follow us there at Bourbon Lens. And last but not least, on your favorite podcast listening app, make sure you're subscribed, because every Monday, Scott and I release a podcast, and we would love to have you here listening to the newest features and the newest whiskey news. And until next time, cheers.